So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today we have Dr. Howard Dover as our guest. Dr. Dover is the director at the Center of Professional Sales at the University of Texas, Dallas. His students are ranked highly in national and international sales competitions. He is a world-class sales coach to individuals, teams, and companies. He's written many papers on sales enablement, social selling, and other sales and marketing topics. Dr. Dover is the best-selling author of the recently released The Sales Innovation Paradox. Welcome, Dr. Dover.
Thank you, Taylor. Glad to be here.
Also with me is Usman Sheikh, the founder and CEO of XIQ. Prior to founding XIQ, Usman has served in several vice president roles with global responsibility at SAP, including sales enablement and digital commerce. He's a regular lecturer at leading U.S. business schools on how AI is transforming B2B sales. Welcome, Usman.
Hey, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Taylor, for doing that great introduction.
Of course. And so today we're going to be talking about how sales has transformed and continues to transform over time. So Usman, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, great. So thank you, Dr. Dover, for joining us today. And congratulations for becoming a bona fide bestseller on Amazon. So that's really, really exciting. We'd love to hear a little bit about what prompted you to write this book called The Sales Innovation Paradox. Of course, I had the privilege and pleasure of being able to read the manuscript prior to it getting published, but I'm sure our audience would like to hear about that. And then as you and I, when we were kind of prepping for this call, we talked about, what's obviously on everybody's mind these days, which is the impending recession or the economic downturn and the news of all these layoffs. So would love to hear your thoughts and views on why these are taking place. And then, just the state of union when it comes to how is the sales technology shaping up? I think your book talks a lot about the innovation and the paradox related to technology. So we'd love to hear your perspective on how you view these technologies. And of course, you've been training salespeople for quite some time. So, things have changed. And we would love to hear, what are your perspectives on how sales is changing? What are some of the skill sets that need to be developed? And we'd like to conclude off with talking a little bit about the future. What's beyond the horizon? Where should we be investing? What should we be thinking about? How should we be getting prepared for the new landscape of sales? So with that said, if we move to the next slide, Taylor, Dr. Dover, why don't you tell us what is the sales innovation paradox? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write this book.
So the sales innovation paradox is simply a couple of data points. So over the last 5 years, prior to the pandemic, so the impetus for the book was prior to the pandemic, but it's still valid today. We had invested a substantial amount of money into technology. At the same time, we also invested a lot of money on training. At the same time, we moved from 20-30% of companies having enablement to 80 to 90% of companies having enablement. And at the same time, we increased the number of people doing SDR functions by 1,300%. Sorry, that's 1,200%, 13x. So the question then becomes, that doesn't make any sense, right? We just increased the capacity of our people to do more with technology. So we should have reduced the number of people using the technology. That's what every other field does, right? But yet instead, our quota attainments are abysmal and we hired more people at the same time. So this creates the question of, well, then technology didn't help us. It's a paradox, right? We should have had better technology lift. We didn't. So we hired more salespeople instead. So it was a research question. Why is this happening? What's going on? I'm an academic, so I said, this can't be good. This can't end well because it doesn't make any sense. And so that was the motivation. That's the paradox, is how do we answer that question? And what's going on? Why are we not harnessing the capacity of technology in a modern era? And what are we doing with all these salespeople? And why do we keep doubling down on human capital instead of harnessing the efficiency and effectiveness of modern tech? And that's the paradox. That's the book. And I started chipping away at it and started giving some keynotes before the pandemic happened. And several people approached me afterwards, because we've been teaching this as I've been answering the question. I've been changing what I teach at UTD for the last 3 to 5 years. And so people would come up to me and say, hey, can we read this? And I was like, no, it's in my head. They said, and several good people. I think the one that really hit me hard was a colleague from England. I was at the Sales Educators Academy in Orlando, Florida, with all the other professors, where I'm the technology expert for the academy. My job is to bring all the technology to the professors once a year and tell them what's going on in your sphere, Usman, and try to help professors be adept at what Silicon Valley is doing to disrupt our world in the future. So I got up and I did my thing, and Jeff comes over from Ashton University. They host the Educators Academy in England every other year. And he said, Howard, every time you speak, you scare me and excite me. And he said, are there papers? And I said, no. And he says, is there a book? And I said, no. And he said, oh, Howard, that just won't do. And he said, you really have to go cocoon yourself and write this. And so I did. And I told Jeff when I saw him this last summer, I said, by the way, you're the reason there's a book. There's many people. So that's the impetus. Is there was a question, and then there was a demand that people asked me to write what I was learning and what I had learned. So
just to kind of summarize, you saw the investment and convergence of investment in technology training, enablement training, and the growth of this SDR boom at that time, but yet there was not an exponential growth or transformation in the results coming out of sales. That's really, really interesting. So without spilling the beans on what's in your book, what would you say are some of the 3 biggest discoveries that one can take away from your book?
Well, I think to understand that there are certain cycles that are occurring. So the buyer is in a technological innovation cycle. The seller is in a technology innovation cycle. But also the buyer is in a cycle where they're reacting to the innovation by the seller. So the buyer is in a double cycle. So the buyer reacts to, for example, I love to use the example of a ring, right? Because it really brings everything together. I have a ring at my home. I love it because I have a home office. And for those of you who don't know about Texas, it's really hot. So we have big houses with a lot of air conditioning. So those of you in California, you have small houses, but you have the ocean. So we compensate it for what we call Texas McMansions. And even the poor have big houses. So, I mean, we all have big houses. So that was a poor statement. Lots of people have houses. Sorry about that. But so I have my office in the back of the house. And so when somebody knocks on the door, I have to decide, am I going to get up and walk all the way to the front of the door? And so could be a package, could be a neighbor, could be a salesperson. And so now I have a ring, so I can see who is at my front door. So that's the technology, right? That's the innovation for me, that's the technology component of the modification. I can now look at my ring. Even right now, if somebody came to my door, Usman, my watch would tell me that somebody's at my door and I could see who was there. Now, here's where the SIB cycle comes in, which is the sales innovation component. So somebody's out there, and whoever's out there teaching this, thank you, because I love it. Because somebody's teaching door-to-door salespeople that they should knock on the door and then step like 10 steps back from the threshold, so that when I open the door, I come out of my door, right? I mean, it makes sense psychologically. I understand how they're training them. They're training them to say, hey, knock on the door, take 10 steps back, so that when the person opens their door, they feel a psychological need to walk out of their door and not feel threatened to close their door, right? Now, what's beautiful about this sales innovation method is that when it's put together with my ring, I now know that a salesperson is at my door because they ring my ring and they step 10 steps backwards. So I automatically know I don't need to go to my front door. It's a beautiful thing, right? It's a combination of both cycles. The innovation that I have, which is the ring, but then there's the sales technique that's been taught as a best practice that helps me identify everybody who knocks on my front door. It's a beautiful thing as a buyer. Now, occasionally I might actually say, hello, what do you need? But normally I just say, I don't really want to buy anything door to door. Right, beautiful thing. Now, if you drop a package on my door, I know immediately who it is. So that's a combination of what we call the SIB cycle and the tab cycle, right? So those are different cycles. So if we don't realize that the customer is constantly shifting, and then we deploy techniques and or technology, then what happens oftentimes is we're swinging and missing. And so the only way to combat that, Usman, is if you're a sales leader, right, you have to hire more people. Because what you're doing doesn't work. Therefore, we have to hire more people to get the result we need. Or we have to shift. But most people are actually, based off the data, clearly, they're hiring more. Now, here's an interesting thing I want to kind of put out there. If we've increased the number of sales people doing SDR work by 13 times, just checking, did we increase the number of buyers in the overall B2B market by 13 times over the same time frame? I don't think so.
I don't think so. Yeah, you're right.
So then what's going on to the poor buyer? They're using technology like a ring at work saying, salesperson, ignore, 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 right? So they're using technology to identify us. And by the way, you may have a beautiful message, but because everybody else is saying it in the same way, based off their sales innovation, their best practice. You gotta love best practices. A best practice means the buyer can identify you.
And the digital
associate you with the negative experience they had last time.
Yeah, and the digital equivalent of your ring is the internet. Now everybody's turning to the internet and online to do their research.
Yes.
And so they are basically preempting the seller and selecting the seller before they even approach the proverbial door by basically doing their own research and saying, do I want to go talk to this person or I don't want to talk to this person? So there's all that selection taking place. And that's the mega trend that's kind of shifting how B2B is happening. We're going to talk a little bit about the digital aspects of this. But Dr. Dover, there's this 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? Everybody is very eager to talk about what's currently happening. And, I'm also curious to hear what your perspective is. So we've just heard in recent days about these major layoffs, right? A lot of big companies, thousands of people being laid off. What does it mean in the context of B2B sales? Is it right sizing where we, like you're saying, those 13x growth in SDRs, not producing the 13x growth in buyers or demos or new leads? Is it a right sizing, or have we just moved to a different point? Has that ring equivalent, the digital equivalent, moved us into a different sphere of selling? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is that the data appears to indicate that we've over-rotated on human capital investment, while simultaneously investing on enablement and technology. So naturally, it wouldn't be shocking that we would see a pullback on the human capital rotation piece, right? Because we've overspent in that space. So it isn't too surprising to then say, well, gee, that's not working. Now, the question is, now, I want to go backwards just a second and say, during the pandemic, I thought we were going to have the moment. So we're sitting in a space in sales that I'd like to call, like a tipping point. At some point, we're going to hit the tipping point, and this is going to change dramatically. So I thought the pandemic would do it, but then I was shocked because people roared back and doubled down on the bad strategy. Well, that's about a year ago. That year and a half ago, we all doubled down on hiring more people. When we had a moment to have the tipping point and really looking at all this with some critical eyes to say, we don't know how to harness the technology yet. And really the technological capacity has leapfrogged our ability to train, hire, manage, coach, and deploy go-to-market strategies. So we're still over-rotating on human capital. So I think now now the question is, we have another moment in time here. We had a moment in time during the pandemic where everybody got laid off. Now we're coming into this second moment in time where companies are having to ask themselves, does this make sense? And the answer is no. It doesn't make sense because I'm hiring people who don't stay with me. My turnover ratio is high. My quota attainment is not exciting. I'm buying technology that I seem to not be able to deploy and manage and have low adoption on. I have a lot of point solutions that are very expensive for me to deploy and people don't use. So when we bring this all together and we hire the wrong people and we don't know how to train them in modern tools, so we're kind of in this really interesting, very frustrating moment in time where when you realize when I hire the wrong person, we do this math with our students who actually talk to companies. If I hire the wrong person, the first piece of that equation is that I lose the money that I pay them. On average, $150,000 to $200,000 to onboard. If I'm in San Francisco, it's closer to $200,000. If I'm in Arkansas, it's maybe $70,000, right? So it just depends on where I'm onboarding them. But I lose that money, and I usually am losing it 10 times over, 5 times over. This isn't just one person. I'm usually struggling with 30, 40, 50% turnover ratios if I don't understand this and if I haven't pinned this down. But what we're really losing is that seat, on average, would generate around $1.5 million. So we're not looking at $1 million problem when I have 10 people that I hired that didn't work out. We're looking at a 1.5 million times 10, we're looking at a $15 million mistake. And I'm still paying a lot of money. I'm buying a lot of technology, and it just isn't coming together. So the challenge, right, is that we need to have this strategic imperative and where we rethink the sales model. It needs to be an infrastructure where training and hiring the right people. The challenge that we're all facing is we know we need to move the field forward. If you're being honest, the technology we have will allow us to move to a different level than where we are today. But we don't have the trainers, we don't have the enablers, and we don't have the managers, and we don't have the people to get there. I foresee that the companies who can harness this are going to be market dominant in the future.
Yeah, and let me add to that, Dr. Dover. That's really, really interesting what you just said, that it's not just the upfront cost that we're investing in hiring and recruiting a person and onboarding them. It's also the quota cost, But it's another big factor is that once we, hire the wrong person, the probability of losing a customer, and a customer cycle in technology today is about 4 to 5 years, right? That's when everybody comes to start rethinking what their tech stack looks like, where, they've amortized over 4 years their investment, and then they come to re-examine how they should replace it. And so you lose a customer for 4 years. And you can multiply that 15 million times 4 if you lose that customer. And that's a pretty heavy cost to pay that salespeople, that companies need to take into consideration. So Dr. Dover, that brings us to the next question, which is, you mentioned that there's a lot of tools in play these days. I mean, we've got a slide here. We go. This is the MarTech map, right? And the latest version, the 2022 version, there's 10,000 sales and marketing solutions out there. 10,000, my God, that's really, and we've got solutions, to manage pipeline, to look up contact information, to do contract management, to develop codes for calculating value and ROI, for writing emails, and on and on and on. So many tools that the poor salesperson doesn't have a chance, I mean, just to kind of get started on learning, I think the average is 12 to 16 tools that a B2B salesperson nowadays needs to master. So we're basically creating tool jockeys, right? We're spending a lot of time in getting the salespeople away from what they should be doing, which is selling, to learning and managing these different tools. And so, you've done a lot of work, and you work with us as well. What is, we talked about the essential versus the good to have. So tell us a little bit about, like, what is the impact of all these tools and this disparate landscape having on the psyche as well as the outcomes of sales? Is it, again, going back into your sales innovation paradox, everybody thinks they've invented the best next tool, right? Killer app. And, but again, that 13x growth is not taking place. So what are your views? Like, how should companies be? What would be your advice to, we've got a lot of great sales leaders on this call right now. What would be advice to them in terms of how to look at their sales technology stack?
Well, the challenge is that most of the solutions are point solutions, right? They're disparate. So you've got this challenge that, and I don't want to get into huge detail on that, but as you look in the book and as you're being honest about this, a lot of tools are designed not to service the customer. They're designed to be sold to a company. And so they need a certain amount of customers and revenue to be bought. So they're a product in and of themselves, the company is. And it's not a product to be bought by the customer. It's a product that's being created by a venture capital fund so that it can be bought by another entity. So in some ways, the customer is the necessary evil of that process, which is really interesting when you think about it. So that's why we have so many disparate solutions, point solutions, little ideas here and there. And that's really kind of causing a lot of noise. What we really need to look at are what are the nice to haves versus, what are the essentials to have. So clean data is a problem, right? Having a CRM type system or a sales engagement platform, some place that digitally houses who your customers are, what your contacts are, what pipeline exists. Those are table stakes and have been for years. But then clean data in that is a problem. I was just talking to a CEO of a new company, a new point solution, that literally goes in and audits audits the amount of correct information that you have right before you go out and do a campaign. The average amount of bad data is 37% wrong numbers. And it's another 9% that they're not even with the company you think they're with. And so when you think, I'm about ready to go do a cadence, or even worse, I'm about ready to do an ABM strategy, because there's a difference between doing a cadence on a person and doing an ABM right market. I'm going to go invest in this company. I'm really going to go a deep dive. Imagine that 37% of what you have is incorrect, and you're going to go spend a lot of money and time and effort based off the firmographics and the psychographics of that firm, and you have a 37% chance that you don't have the right data.
And that number has grown, right, Dr. Dover? Because in the last 2 years, with this great attrition, 40% people moving, data has just not caught up. So that 37% has probably multiplied. I can definitely speak for ourselves that our contact database has depreciated in value significantly. It's changed a lot, right? A lot more than we thought it would. And it's really this great attrition is really having a compounded effect on.
Yeah, I think it's really moved. I mean, it's always been important to have the data. But now we're in this moment where it's important to have accurate data. I mean, it's always been, I'm a data integrity guy, so I get this. Your data is always dirty, but how clean can you get the data? But because of the Great Resignation and because of the layoffs, I mean, you really got the combination of factors that are converging and saying, hey, so what we're saying, I mean, think about what we're saying, Usman. I mean, really, really think about this for a moment. Let's take firm A. It's impossible. Let's go with firm A actually is deploying not point solutions, but an integrated solution. They've found a way that they don't need 10 times the salespeople, and they have accurate data. Now let's go to firm B. Firm B has 40% of their data bad, and they have to hire 100 salespeople to go to market because they haven't figured out how to harness the technology. So firm A can hire 10 people because they can do the work of 10 people with one person because they've deployed technology properly and they have clean data. The other firm has to hire 100 people. Let's start from day one. Let's say they both innovate the same way. In the book, I actually do the math on this. The firm that is modern will capture 67% of the market in year one. And firm B will not even be done onboarding by the time that firm A has hit 67% of market. That's market dominance. You've dominated the market because you had the right data, the right tools, and you, by the way, that's more controllable to train. So there was a question by somebody in the chat. So what can I do as a small company? I don't think this is small or big, Usman. I think this is about dominance. This is about saying, hey, if I have the right tools and I have the right go-to-market and I know how to train people. There was a company called Beck Technologies and a leader by the name of Tyler Barron. I love Tyler because you know what? He is firm A. He is the example of firm A. He punches above his weight class. He is a technologist. He knows how to train. He knows how to coach. He knows how to go to market with modern tools. He is a small company, but he punches like a big one. And he's done it over and over and over again. So it's not about being big. It's not about being small. It's about being strategic so that you can play into your market and develop a dominance within the space. Don't get me wrong, you can't dominate every market, but you can dominate certain segments of your market and do it rather quickly. And by the way, if you only have to hire 10 salespeople, you can do that faster than hiring 100. But this is where we have things wrong, is where everybody, 80 to 90% of the market is in B, not A. They're actually hiring hundreds of salespeople, and they haven't deployed the technology properly, so they're struggling. They have all these point solutions, so they're using classic methodologies. The best way to describe this for Marvel fans, if you're not a Marvel fan, I'll try to describe. If you could have an Iron Man suit, which we do, we have an Iron Man suit in sales, which in real world, if you could fly, if I could give you a suit right now, Usman, where you could fly, right? I could put you in a suit and you could fly. By the way, that suit can also explode buildings, and that suit can, cause machine guns to go off, right? And can shoot you up to the moon if it needs to. And then I just put you in there and say, hey, Usman, call people like you used to call them. And you say, okay, what does this button do? Oh my gosh, I'm halfway to the moon. Oh my gosh. And by the way, you probably crashed because I didn't train you how to fly. I didn't train you on anything. I said, hey, I'm going to put you in the suit. And now, by the way, let's say, so now you go, aha, I pinpointed my number one customer. They're in Salesforce Tower right now. So you go fly over to Salesforce Tower, you blow up a little hole, you walk in there in an Iron Man suit. I'm sorry, Mark Benehoff's security will have taken you out. Right? You're not a welcome guest. You're a pest, and you didn't think through, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't fly right into Salesforce Tower, even though I have the technology to do so. I have to now adjust. I have to have modern motions that go with the modern equipment so that I actually approach the customer in a way. If somebody walked up, Usman, if you went to your number one customer, let's say they're on a walk down on the pier, and you were to fly down in an Iron Man suit and without removing your mask, and you say, I am Usman, and I'm here to take care of your needs, your customer is going to run away scared. They're like, oh my gosh, who's Usman, and why is he in a suit? Does that make sense? So these are our challenges. We have the capacity to be in an Iron Man suit, but we haven't trained people how to fly. And we haven't trained them for the reality. If I show up, the modern equivalent is, I've looked at your firmographics. I've looked at your psychographics. I've looked at your demographics, and I am fully loaded with a lot of intelligence about you. Now, if I'm untrained, I can creep you out in the vernacular of the young, or freak you out in the vernacular of the old. Either way, I'm not going to be impressed. I'm going to be a little turned off unless you use that in a way that I say, oh my gosh, you actually have done your homework. Yes, I would love to talk to you.
Yeah, that's a great point you make about 10 versus 100. And I like it because I think that, it's equivalent to garbage in, garbage out. If you take the old methods. So first of all, what you said is that technology today has overtaken the way we sell, right? And how we approach people. And we don't need to have this archaic, antiquated tech stack where we have to learn 10 to 12 different solutions to come up with one answer. We can get that very quickly. But we then still need to know, A, how to use it in the context, and that really it can fly me to the moon if I use it and I know how to get there. But yes, somebody has to. So the training, basically what you're saying is that training methods we've used have to also kind of evolve. And I think one of the topics we talked about was, training has focused predominantly on methodologies, and it's the era of skills now, right? So tell us a little bit about, how has you've done a lot of sales training, and you've seen all the methodologies that are out there. How has that changed? How have we shifted from methodologies to skills? What's the difference?
Well, I think the first challenge, and this is why we have the paradox, is the answer is we have not.
Right.
But we need to. So we need to move away from the era of methodologies. And really, to be honest, we need to move away from the manufacturing principles of the previous era. They are useful for us. Listen, manufacturing principles are great because they replace chaos. So chaos is a bad strategy. Manufacturing principles are the next strategy. But they produce a scaling mentality that assumes that human beings are like machines and can be multiplied without variance. Well, that's not true. We're dealing with buyers that are in a constant state of shift. We're dealing with sellers who are in a constant state of shift. We're dealing with a technological evolution phase that is so continuous that everybody is constantly in movement. And these are human beings that are adjusting both their adaptation of the technology and their adoption of the technology, and the adaptation behaviorally to how that technology impacts the way they go about their lives. And this isn't just happening once. This isn't like, oh, gee, we just got the iPhone and we're shifting. No, we've got multiple apps hitting our phones. We've got multiple concepts. We've got AI that's constantly moving in a forward-looking direction. And yet we're still teaching about methodologies. Like we're still teaching MEDDIC, or we're still teaching SPIN, or we're still teaching Challenger. There's nothing inherently wrong with the methodologies, but are they right for, the question that I keep on asking, I think we're in a moment in time, and we're using models that were built for another moment in time, and we're deploying them in a modern moment, and they don't seem to be fitting. That's the problem that we run into, is we've got the wrong models for the moment. So what we really need to do is break this down and say, well, now, wait a minute. At the end of the day, what is the buyer actually doing? How do I use technology to understand that, predict it? What I really think is amazing with some of the AI technology around this idea that not only can I understand what your title is your company the ideal customer profile? Beck Holland often says, well, it's not ICP, it's not ideal customer profile, it's ideal customer title within the company. And I would propose with a technology like XIQ, you actually need to ask the question, what's the ideal customer personality and title to begin my journey to also then watch the buyer's journeys, plural, with personality perspectives to then map the buying journey of the entity over time. And by the way, we have no training on any of this. Usman, you know this, and I know this. We've been beginning training on this at UT Dallas for the last 3 years since we've been working with XIQ. And what we know is that when our students then leave and go into the field, they're outperforming their peers dramatically because they're not using classic methodologies. They're harnessing modern tools and developing modern skills with those tools. Yeah. And that's what's needed. Now, this is a chicken egg problem. Do you agree? I mean, we can't deploy the technology until we know how to do it, but we don't know how to do it until we deploy the technologies. So this is not a good place for you to go to your learning team and say, hey, let's build a training, because they say, oh, there isn't anything out there we can use. Therefore, we're going to train what we know, which is these off the shelf, easy to buy, easy to implement. And oh my goodness, we can scale it. We can scale it. So this is one of my favorite sayings, and I'm going to go forever with it, because what we've been doing is we've been scaling it instead of nailing it. We've been failing it. And so it's because there's this idea, hey, this is working, let's scale it. And what everybody comes away from is, in a modern era, after you've scaled it, after you did that 13x SDR, you eventually come away with a little bit of a hangover saying, hey, that didn't work. Or you moved on to the next job to do it over and over and over again. You're a player, right? You're a scale player. I know how to scale my org to 100 SDRs in 8 months. That's your skill, and you keep doing it. You keep doing it. You keep doing it. But what the people are doing is maybe leaving behind something that doesn't work. By the way, this is where Jocko over at Winning by Design is making a mint. The guy's a genius because he's identified that companies build up these infrastructures without strategy. And so he comes in and cleans it up. It's what Beck Holland is doing. She's going in and cleaning up the mess. So there's these people who are just specializing in cleaning up the mess of scale because it isn't working, but it's the only thing anybody knows how to do. And yet there's this whole new world of saying, hey, what if I start with a clean database, with a focused strategy, if I have Ironman suits, and I have Ironman suits, if I could actually take the time to say, let me hire people who know how to fly those suits. By the way, there's very few that do, unless they come from UTD. or from other places, right? There's a few of my other friends at LSU that are using the technology as well. So got to give a shout out to Greg Howto for being able to do a lot of what we're doing with XIQ and some other things. So there's other friends out there.
Stacy at University of Wisconsin as well.
Yes, yeah. So lots of good people out there. But, unless you get people who are trained in the Ironman suits, then you have to develop a training concept and a go-to-market concept that's around being able to fly in a modern suit with modern perspective, and then appreciate the classic methodologies that are useful in the moments that we find them. But we have to have skills and the ability to assess the situation we're in a modern way, using modern technology to give us insight.
Yeah. And, I like that. And then, again, I like to highlight what you just said, that, when we have this disparate landscape and we're doing something that was the way we did things yesterday, and yesterday doesn't matter anymore today because the world's really moved on, we're losing agility, we're losing responsiveness, we're losing the ability to hire the right people for the right skills. We're losing personalization. And responsiveness and personalization, I think, are two huge factors in helping you secure bigger deals faster. And if you're not getting to be able to address the needs of your customer and better understand, how many calls do you get a day where people start that same consultative approach, or they start making small talk in your precious time, and you're like, look, I'm not interested. I want to talk to people who are really, really trained and know who I am and get right to the point, because today, and everybody on this call also knows, that the technology exists and the information is out there where no salesperson should be making an unprepared sales call. They should be super personalized, super prepared, plugged into who they're talking to. And that's really how you move the deal forward. But
let me put one word down, Usman. It's called relevance.
Relevance. I love it. Yeah.
Because what the customer is assessing, with everything you just said, what if I'm the customer, you're either relevant to me or you're not. And that's the problem. Everything you just described, right? What is the customer looking for? Well, they're looking for a salesperson who's relevant to their need. And that's what everything you described can be brought down to relevance. You know what? If you're a relevant seller to me, you're gold. You're valuable to me. You know my business, you know me, you know my position in the business, you know who I'm dealing with. See, we've got the slide up here with the XIQ information. I mean, the progression with XIQ to be able to help me see the decision makers now. I mean, come on, a year ago, I couldn't figure out who the decision makers were. I mean, I can do that with Navigator, but now not only can I know who the decision makers are, with XIQ, I can know their personality profiles and their tendencies. And that's a tool. Now, how do we train people to sell in an environment in which this data is readily available on first meeting, prior to first meeting, in the middle of meetings? How do we move forward? Because this is so impactful now. Because before I said, I don't even know who they are. Now I can even find out who they are and what their tendencies are. This allows me to be relevant. So if I'm talking to an I in a deal, or I'm talking to a D in the deal, I'm talking to an S or a C in the disc profile settings, then I know that there's some other people they're playing with, and I can begin. Once again, this is where our training needs to move into, is to say, given the existence of this personality in the deal, what do I logically think is going to happen next? And I know that you and I both know that Scott Gillam's doing some great work on this, and you're collaborating with him on this. And it's really some forward thinking it's getting into the space of how do we strategically use this, because this is Iron Man intelligence, right? It's the screen, for those of you, once again, that saw the movie, that we've got Jarvis. We can say to XIQ, hey, XIQ, I'm going up on company X. Can you give me a dossier on the company so I get the firmographics? Can you give me a layout of the full decision-making team? And can you tell me the ones that are the most likely to want to talk to me? What are the ones that are most likely going to block me? What are the ones that are most likely going to make the decision? And can you let me know who they are so that when I'm talking to somebody, I can say, hey. So let me give you a specific use case, Usman. So we're talking about a company with one of the students. And the student says, oh, I'm kind of stuck in the deal. I'm not sure where it's going to go. And I said, well, let's take a look at the geography. So let's go into the geography. And we found the people who were in Dallas that were in this company. And then we looked, we didn't look at title completely. We looked at title and personality and said, oh, there's an I that lives in Dallas and a D that lives in Dallas. So now we're going to go back and talk to the person we're talking to in New York and say, hey, I was doing some research. I know you'd like to engage with UT Dallas. You live in New York, but I noticed there's two people here that are actually in Dallas that one of them is a recruiter who probably you would be tapping anyway. And another one is a sales manager who might be interested as well. And I said, send an email. That once again, is when you're going to know it, right? We went ahead and said, okay, now send the first email and say, I noticed that the I recruiter is in Dallas. So they're going to give a lot of detail in that email because that's what XIQ tells me to do, is give them more detail to the I and give them stuff they can share. But then to the D, I'm going to write a short email to say, what's in it for them? Why should they come? Send those as two separate emails, but identified to the buyer. I'm getting very technical, but at the same time here, this is how we move modern forward. By instead of saying, hey, just checking in to see where we're at, I'm using technology. I'm using the Iron Man suit to say, you know who you're probably going to ask to come? It's going to be these two people in Dallas. If I send one email, I'm going to offend one of them. I'm going to send two emails. One of them that says, I've identified the I who wants a lot of information about what this is going to be about. And I've identified the D who doesn't want a whole lot of information, but what's in it for me? Why is this valuable? Why, right? Give them the information to make a quick decision and what's the value. And I send two emails to the same person and say, I wanted to help you out. Maybe you'd think about taking these two people. Here's an email. Here's an email. You could easily forward them. And I'm helping you. I'm relevant.
And the relevance and the relevance, sorry to interrupt, but the relevance changes between the different personality types. So
absolutely.
And you can't have the same relevance across for every single person. So therefore, you need to have these modern tools to help you to get to those, to be able to uncover what their personality types are and how, and to actually engage with them. That's the how to is also very important. So Dr. Dover, that brings us to the next question, the most important question. So what do you see over the horizon? So what's your crystal ball telling you? Where does this all go to, right? So,
well, I think you know, as I watch the progression that XIQ is making, there's always natural next steps, right? The natural next step for you was to go corral all that data and put it into kind of a launch pad that says, here's the whole decision-making group, and here's the personality profiles. And then we can even heat map, right? We can even heat map that firm and say, what's the probability they're actually even going to make a change? Well, I think when you think about that, what's the natural next step? We're able to search based off these things, right? We're able to search off the parameters. What's the natural next thing, right? We have the technology now with the combination of company dossiers within AI profiles and within the ability to identify those individuals who are working with companies most likely to make change. then of course we could actually begin to create, we're going to automate some of the outbound and some of the digital platforming that goes. So we really can get to where the emails are written, the engagement is done, developing the account plan using tools on a strategic level, literally almost this concept of, I mean, it's a bit futuristic, but my goodness, it's being done so poorly now with human beings. I wonder if we might actually be able to say I have a couple of voice automations in my office, so I've got to say the right one. I'm going to say Alexa because I don't have Alexa near me. I really do believe we're at the point where I could literally say, Alexa, I'm XIQ, or I'm UT Dallas. And what I want to do is I'm trying to find sales organizations who are trying to hire new salespeople with modern skills. Please curate an accurate list of people that would be willing to come to Dallas and be part of what we're doing. In fact, why don't you go ahead and nurture that for me? And in fact, why don't you just go all the way? Here's my calendar app that's already integrated, and just book me with the people who are ready, and I'll just sit here and take the meetings. We're there. We're just not connected. Those dots haven't been fully connected yet, but we have all the technology where literally we could do pipeline as a service. It's being done so poorly by humans, I can't imagine that the AI is going to do worse. And that doesn't mean that we don't need human augmentation of digital outreach, because we do, but it does mean that we probably need to get away from this headcount over rotation that we've done and really deploy the technology in such a way that we use humans where humans are the most valuable, which is in the moment that the technology can't identify the nuance of the need.
Yeah, we're not digging holes manually anymore. We're using machines to dig holes for us. And we're
Unfortunately,
using design.
Unfortunately, we are using humans to dig a lot of big, it's like the movie Holes. If you've seen the movie Holes, that's where we're at right now, is we have a lot of 6x6 holes in the middle of nowhere that have not produced any results for us. But by golly, the way to take care of that, Usman, right now is we need to dig more holes. And if you've not seen the movie Holes, you don't understand the reference, read the book Holes, but we're digging holes manually right now. And yet what we could do is we could use precision instruments that say, actually, the highest probability of where you need to dig the hole is at this point. Let's do a penetration probe. Oh, yep, indeed, that's the spot. Then we use mechanization to dig the hole, and then we use humans to pull the treasure chest out, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, we're really there, but we're over-rotated on human capital.
Yeah, and exactly what we started off with, that now is the time where we have to start thinking about how to be able to do more with less.
Yeah.
And we've got to start thinking about new methods. And most of the trainers out there, most of what we know is what we know. And we don't know what we don't know. And as you're saying very wisely so, and kind of, based on your experience, you're starting to guide us towards the fact that it's worth the risk. The risk has been mitigated to a great extent, where we can actually start leveraging AI to do what it's meant to do, which is to be able to go through this huge calculus of being able to help us, as you were saying, find that ideal customer profile, find the way of being able to engage each one of them individually. And really, I'm going to use a term which currently some of your friends are not very happy about, which is hyper personalization at scale. They kind of scoff at it, right? But it really is the time for us, and the capabilities do exist where we can do that. And as you're saying, we're doing as humans such a bad job about it that we could actually use the machines and the machine learning capability and the AI to actually help us at least reach par at a much significantly lower cost, significantly quicker. And I will venture to say this, knowing this, that we will do it a lot better. And the place for the human still exists, right? But it is the right place for the human. It's not the non-value added space. And companies given the economic conditions, given the high turnover, given the high cost of training people, we've got to start thinking of new ways to use the Iron Man suit to be able to achieve more with less. And that's got to be the imperative, right?
Well, and I think the challenge is we're doing more already. We need to do more with less, but I think the objective really needs to be relevance. It isn't about doing more with less, because as people do more, the problem is the customer sitting there and saying, I don't want more. What we need to do is more relevant with less. More relevance with less, and the technology absolutely exists. The challenge that we'll all run into for the leaders that are out there, and even the individuals that are out there, is that we're not ready to move. We're afraid to move. There's a lot of inertia. And so the institute that I'm forming right now will be looking into diagnostics to be able to go into a company and determine what's where is your training, where are your people, where are your opportunities to make these transitions? Because it isn't as simple as saying we're going to do it, because your existing team may struggle with a lot of this. It's not that simple, yet it is essential that we need to get there. And so we need to be able to be honest about the fact that there's a lot of inertia that exists within an organization. Those are the final 3 chapters of the book is discussing. One of the biggest reasons we're in the paradox is the existence of massive inertia being caused by multiple components, both in the ecosystem and internally within the orgs. So the ability to kind of diagnostic that within the company and look at how much impact the ecosystem is having on you will become an essential component to be able to move forward. So it's a combination of factors. It's the cycles and then the inertia. The combination of those two, when we understand them, allows us to move forward.
Yeah. And that's great. Thank you so much. That's so insightful and so helpful. Let's see, are there any questions on the group, Taylor, if you want to come back online? And I'm sure there are some questions that have been submitted. If not, we do have a chat where you could submit your questions. I think that's your job. It's not mine. So maybe you can start asking.
Of course. So this recording will be on demand on the XIQ website. And we did have one question in addition to the other one Dr. Dover answered earlier. So Dr. Dover, what are the must-have skill sets for those future sales reps?
So this is where I'm probably going to disappoint. I think we're discovering them. So that's not a very nice answer, but it's an honest answer. I think that the skills that we need are being discovered. There is a paper that we did. We went to LinkedIn a couple of years ago, and this is with Karen Piesker up in Canada, to evaluate what do we think the number one skill of the future was, and it was the analytic skills. And that's because I have to be able to take all of the data that's coming into me, and I have to be able to analyze it and then execute on it. So that's a skill that we often don't consider within sales, is the ability to analyze and execute on information. And yet, if we're going to tool up people in an Iron Man suit, they truly need to be able to consume intelligence, develop plans, and execute in an agile way. So that's a high-level skill, but we probably need to break it down into sub-skills. But I think we're still going to be discovering it.
Yeah, I agree. Let me add to that, Taylor. I think listening, and by listening, the modern day version of listening is researching, right?
Yes.
And understanding to be able to create that relevance. I think that's a very, very important skill that is required. It's always been required. It is still required. Just the tools and how we go to get that information, because Dr. Dover, there is a lot of information. That is one of the reasons why we formed XIQ's AI engine, is there's a lot of relevant information that can be used in sales cycle. It's just that humans are not, don't have the capacity or the time or the dedication to get to that. So listening and using that in the right time is super important. And then, one of my colleagues submitted another suggestion, which is resilience. Resilience is a very, very important trait that we need to have today. And we forget that resilience is required. And it's across the board, not just in the younger generation. We're losing resilience. I think there's a deprecation of resilience that's taking place across the board.
Yeah,
I would add those two skills.
That's spot on. I think resilience is something we all need to be honest about moving. We just went through a pandemic, and no, I love the Allstate. Is it the Allstate commercial? No, it's the Survey Monkey, the one, right? Nobody knows how to do this because nobody's experience, nobody's degrees are relevant anymore, right? Because we're in a moment that we've never been in. So nobody knows. Anybody who says they know is really being a bit disingenuous, right? So we're in a new moment in time. Nobody's lived through a pandemic. We just did. Nobody understands the ripple effects of a pandemic. We can go back to the 1918 and look, but I mean, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have social media. We didn't, right? It's different. It's similar, but different. But the one thing is, resiliency is in short supply. Exhaustion is the new contagion. Quiet quitting, right? The great resignation were the early symptomatic signals of the lack of resiliency. And that is something I think we all need to be very honest about, is that we're kind of overwhelmed collectively, and we're probably all experiencing some degree of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? As a collective world, we're all exhausted, and we still want to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and say, I can just make this. And yet somehow we're still just blah, right? And I think we're not talking enough about that. There's some people that I know have been doing some good research on this. There's a colleague of mine, Bruno, up at HEC Montreal, who's doing some stuff on mental health in sales. And he and I are trying to figure out how to do some projects together, but he's already done some great projects on mental health in sales. And I think we've all got to turn around here and say, hey, it's okay not to be okay. Uncrushed is a great organization that's been founded by Tim Clark and Lindsay Boggs and some other people that was pre-pandemic, talking about how salespeople don't take care of themselves and they crush themselves. And so please check that out, Uncrushed. And I just think we all need to get a little bit more open to saying, hey, we just went through hard things. And resiliency I agree wholeheartedly, Usman, we need to develop resiliency as a characteristic and attribute. I don't know is it a characteristic and attribute or a skill? It doesn't matter. We all need to get it, because I'm needing resiliency myself, and it's a battle, right?
The East German bicyclists, the cycling team that was extremely successful at the Tour de France, what they used to do is they used to just ride the stationary bike 7 hours looking at nothing but a concrete wall.
Wow.
Right? That's almost that's torture. I don't know if that's a good thing. Hey, there's one more question, Taylor. I think if you can please ask, and then we're over our time limit, but I like that question. And I'd like Dr. Dover, if you can just maybe take a minute to please answer that question. Go ahead, Taylor.
Of course. So someone asked, how do you break away from the methodologies that are so strongly engraved and really find those new ways? And how do you really be fearless about it?
Great question.
Yeah, that's the crux, isn't it? That's where the inertia comes in. So how do you break away from the methodologies? Well, the first challenge is you have to be listening to people like Usman. You do have to be listening to different voices. I'm very fortunate that we have sales leadership summits here at UT Dallas, and I bring in voices that are provocative, innovative. I don't always agree with the voices. but I think they make us think. I think we have to start thinking differently. I like to say that the methodologies or the skills of the future that we need haven't been invented, or like the Peter Druckers of our era haven't been found, but they are currently in our midst. And the new Jack Welches of our era are being formed at this moment. And so that's our challenge, is we need to be agile. And then we have to be honest about inertia. I think it's Cheyenne, right?
Yep.
Cheyenne, I think that the issue is to be honest about inertia. If you're in an organization that will not allow deviation from the existing methodology, you're sitting in a space that has a significant inertia, and you may need to decide, I'm in the wrong place. Now, if you're a leader, that if you can't transform an org because the inertia is operating in a different space for you with your people. So what you do is you allow it to happen. It's an allowance. So if I'm a leader, I allow it to happen. If at all possible, I support it to happen, but I've not seen people be able to scale it except for Microsoft has done it in one division and they've maintained it for like 5 years. That is the anomaly. I've seen like 10 companies do it, and the only one I've seen maintain it, well, there's two. Lennox Corporation would be another one, and then Microsoft, the demand gen division. And Lennox Corporation has been able to maintain it for years as well. So, but most companies lose it because it's tough. So fearless about it. I think just knowing that you're right, but making sure that you're in an organization that allows, because what we're saying is you have to be agile to be able to maintain where you need to go. And if agility is not allowed within your organization or supported, then you have to move to an organization that the leadership allows for innovation in go-to-market strategies, not structured rigidity and compliance components. And you got to look at your team and you got to look at your leadership and say, hey, the natural state is to go back to what we know, but what we know isn't adequate for the moment we're in.
Yeah, risk-taking, sorry to interrupt, but risk-taking would be a very big factor, right? You got to have risk-taking instilled in leadership.
So yeah, great question. It's really the last third of the book, which was the hardest part of the book to write, because it took me a long time to kind of think through that exact problem, is how do you do it? And it's not simple, but it's worth it.
Indeed.
Well said, Dr. Dover. And I want to take a moment to thank everyone who joined today's session. Again, just a reminder, this recording will be available on XIQ's website. And that is the end of our webinar. So thank you, Dr. Dover, for your time today. We really appreciate it and all the insights that you gave us.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Usman.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Really insightful, really helpful. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.